Thank you very much. I'm going to do the housekeeping right now because I will definitely forget. At the end of the session, could you all stay seated for a minute just while Alastair gets to the back to sign some books?
When you say stay seated, after the standing ovation.
Sorry, yes, stand as normal.
Standing ovation, sit down, and then we can start. Then we'll go. By the way, I should start by apologising for not being Jeremy Bowen.
Well, I was going to say thank you so much for stepping in last minute and coming down to Bridport to talk about my new book.
Which I, by the way, named as my book of the year.
Thank you very much.
I did.
I want to explain
friends, by the way.
why I'm talking to Alastair. We know each other because we swim together at 7 o'clock every morning in the Lido in Hampstead Heath. So it's a great pleasure to meet you finally with your clothes on. And it's lovely to be here, and it's back home for me. I've spent this. The other thing I wanted to do just before we start is to find out roughly how many people listen to The Rest Is Politics. Oh, good. Oh. Okay, so a good section.
Quite a lot.
Yeah. So there's some other podcasts are available. So I spent the last week rereading, Rory would be proud of me, rereading your new book, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it again. And for those of you who haven't read it, it starts quite downbeat as a sort of very eloquent diatribe against the state of politics here, but also around a lot of the world at the moment. But the second half is, I think, really optimistic. It's really reminds us that politicians aren't all the same. That as individuals we can make a difference, and also talks a lot about your optimism about the youth of today. So
most of whom are in the room.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't share quite as much optimism as the father of two teenagers, but it is nice to read that, and nice to also get a lot of really fantastic insights into what we can do. But I wanted to start with the youth, and one, I'm trying to ask questions that I don't know the answer to. So I want to look back at this 16-year-old Alastair Campbell. You think that the vote should go down to 16. So what was the 16-year-old Alastair Campbell like? What were you dreaming of? What were you thinking about? Were you worried about the world?
I had a sense of the world, but I wasn't that political. My parents weren't that political. They're very interested in politics, but they weren't actively political. My dad was a vet. My mum was a farmer's daughter, and they would have known what was happening politically. It wasn't a very political household. So, I mean, that's a very interesting question. I've never been asked that before, because I don't know whether, isn't he good?
You'd never know this is the first time I've ever done anything like this.
But I think I was definitely socially conscious. We lived I grew up from 0 to 11 in Yorkshire, and we lived at the top of the town. And to get into town, I had to walk through this very Pakistani area. And I can remember it very young thinking their lives aren't as good as ours, and feeling that was a bad thing. So I had that. But, it's a great question. Would I even have voted? I don't know. I hope I would. Because the other thing I'd like to bring in is compulsory voting. I've got to tell you, are we far from Bath here?
Far enough.
Okay. All right. So I was in a primary school near Bath recently, and they were saying, why do you have to be 18 to vote? And I said, well, that's the law, and, be an adult. But as it happens, I'd like to lower it to 16. And this little kid sitting cross-legged on the front, why not 5?
Yeah. Oh, so many reasons. Actually, I think maybe 5 to 12 and then stop for a couple of years and then start again at 16. But you were writing then, is what I understand, and you even at that age. And am I right in thinking that was already a big part, and you were already thinking about journalism, or when did journalism?
No, I wasn't even thinking about journalism. I have written a lot all my life. I think the reason I started doing a diary was actually when my dad was a vet, And when I was about 9 or 10, he had a really bad accident. He was in hospital for ages. And it's not like today where you can visit when you want and all that. We couldn't visit because the visiting hours didn't work. And so I used to write to my dad. I used to write these letters to my dad every day. And, they were literally like, this is my day kind of thing. I used to write songs. I used to write poems. And I say in the book that, as long as you haven't read the book, I'll give a free copy to anybody who can tell me, who promises me they haven't read the book already, who wrote a poem called Think in Ink.
I've read it twice and I can't remember.
Can't remember? Can't you remember?
I can remember the Think in Ink, and I think...
You can't remember where it came from?
I can't remember who the...
Think in Ink was a poem written by Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, no, yeah.
Yeah, and Think in Ink is kind of one of my mottos. So I write, if I'm thinking about things, I think them through with a pen. And although I do now do a lot, like write like that, I actually think that now, a few years ago, I started writing my diary electronically, and I probably shouldn't say this if there are any publishers in the room, but it's not as interesting. And I think that's because a pen is just a more interesting way of recording things, because it gives you more time to think.
And so you were writing away, but then you went pretty much from university into journalism. Is that right?
I went in from university into a kind of weird year, travelling the world with a set of bagpipes and being a busker, and not really knowing, and drinking far too much, and not really knowing what I wanted to do with my life.
Drinking your bagpipes.
Yeah.
As a combination.
Well, it was a great combination. I made a lot of money.
Right.
And if anybody says they paid you to go, I will. No, so I don't to this day even know. There's no journalism in my family, just like there's no politics in my family. And I have no idea how I knew that there was this thing called the Mirror Group Training Scheme. But I applied to it and I got on it, and that's where Fiona and I met. And, I became a journalist.
And why? But what was it that made you want to be? Was it just the writing, or was it the politics or stories?
I think it was words, and it was stories, and it was just being very, very interested in lots and lots of different things. Right. I think the great thing about being journalism at its best is about, journalism at its best is about truth, holding truth to power, speaking truth to power, and uncovering things that other people don't want to know. But journalism ultimately is about curiosity. And it's about thinking that every single person you meet has got a good story in them, which they have. Yeah. The question is, how do you mine that story, and how do you relate it to other things that are happening? And then the politics, I think, came. So I was a journalist, got onto the Mirror. The Mirror Group Training Scheme. You had 2 years on local papers, and then you had 6 weeks on a national. And then it was a bit sink or swim. And I was very lucky because I got 6 weeks on the Mirror. And I kind of I made my name there, really, and they kept me on. And the politics, I think I started to realise that I was a lot more political than I thought. And it's so strange, I can't remember the exact date, but if you look up the date of the Bradford City fire, that was the day when I decided I really need to get into political journalism, and that was the route to politics, because on that day I was with Neil Kinnock, because we'd got all his family, his extended family, dozens of them, in this hotel in London, where we were going to put them on the roof and just do a massive family photo as a sort of spread for the Mirror. And I wasn't there as a journalist, I was there as a minder, to make sure that no other journalists found out what we were up to, what we were doing, and so forth. But I just spent a lot of time talking to Neil Kinnock, and he's still one of our closest friends. And he didn't sort of say, you should get into political journalism, but I just realised, why am I wasting my time writing stories about sort of B-list celebrities and, rewriting women's own interviews with sort of, I don't know. I was doing some good stuff as a journalist, but so I went into political journalism, then, that's how I got to know people like John Smith, Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, John Prescott, all the people that I would eventually sort of work with. And then when John Smith died and Tony became leader, he asked me to work for him.
So it seems like we sort of accept this, journalists become advisors or politicians, as if they're very similar jobs. It seems that Gito Harry, I won't say the name, but Johnson, all these very close. But is it You
just said the name.
I know, but I didn't say the first name.
You didn't say the first name. Okay.
No, I've known you long enough not to ever say that name. But
should we tell them about the brother?
About the
brother in the pool.
Oh, yeah. Yes, there's a very, very interesting dynamic between lane 2 and 3 in the Lido, where someone with the surname Johnson swims up and down looking...
No, but the worst thing is his hair is identical. So if people don't know that it's him, strangers will wander in and they think Boris Johnson's going up and down the pool. And I've actually had to stop people from drowning him. So don't say I'm a really bad person. I'm not. I'm a good person.
No. There's no higher bar than stopping someone drowning a Johnson. But I'm interested. I've never really found out that transition across. So you go from being a journalist to being a strategist, communications leader for a political opposition leader. I mean, did you feel like did you have imposter syndrome? I don't know if you suffered with that, but did you know what you were doing? Did you feel trained?
No, I'll tell you. The longer I've been in journalism, the more I actually felt that I was political rather than a journalist.
Right.
So I had lots of friends who were journalists, and so for example, Don McIntyre, who was a journalist on The Independent, and a very good friend of mine. And so when I took the job with Tony, he said, "Oh, this is great for me, isn't it?" I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Well, we're mates, aren't we?" I said, "Don, not anymore."
Right.
I mean, yes, you're a mate, but I will never see my job as being to help you, unless it suits where I am now. And I think one of the reasons I got the sort of bad reputation that I did with a lot of journalists is because, unlike most people doing that job, I was honest about it. I actually was making no bones about the fact that they thought they had the right to set the political agenda, and I just was not going to have that, because I'd seen the damage that did to Neil Kinnock. When I think Mrs. Thatcher's got a lot to answer for here, because I'm
very surprised to hear that.
No, listen, there's lots of things I'll say in her defence, but I'll tell you what happened in this, is that they literally had a system. The owners got peerages, the editors got knighthoods, the ones just below got promises of sort of preferment and better access and so forth, which is, to me, is a form of corruption. And, I think we've seen quite a lot of it in recent years. Johnson, for example, I don't think Johnson would ever have got near the bottom of the pile, let alone the top, had he not been a journalist whose failings were not covered by his fellow journalists, but whose whatever merits he had were exaggerated. So there is a sort of, I never saw myself as a journalist as soon as I left journalism. It doesn't mean that, but I'll tell you the other thing. Look, lots of journalists go into politics as elected politicians. Michael Gove, Boris Johnson, great examples, aren't they? But some good ones have done it. And I think that, I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think if there's one thing that the whole Johnson experiment has shown, is that you cannot do politics at a serious level unless you're a serious person. Politics at its best, well, politics any time is serious, or should be, but at its best, it's serious people wrestling with serious challenges, and that's what I loved about it.
And did you, something you said that, was it an active thing when you switched over, as it were, that it was a complete change of allegiance, obviously, but also a new thing I'm going to do is run the agenda?
Oh, yeah, totally.
And that was that new? I mean, this is my ignorance, youth probably, but was that a new thing in politics? Or?
No, I think lots of people have tried to do it.
Right.
But from the Labour perspective, I think Labour just sort of rolled with the punches and thought, oh, well, the press is really, really biased. There's nothing you can do about it. You've just got to kind of roll with it. But we actually came at it from a different perspective. And I write a lot in the book about strategy and how you make strategy and how you push strategy through, because I felt that unless we set the agenda, then we'd get knocked about. Like, you can see it happening a little bit with Kier Smith at the moment, where, just think about it, what's going on in the Middle East. Now, of course, the Labour Party, people may be thinking, well, Labour are going to be the government. But at the moment, in relation to what's happening in the Middle East, Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister. The British government is showing, rightly in my view, considerable support for Israel. I wish there was a little bit more of kind of voicing support for the Palestinian people as well. But Rishi Sunak is getting no political flack for that position at all. Keir Starmer is getting flack left, right and centre because, and we saw it to give a more trivial-ish example, during the COVID inquiry, where the Daily Mail, 13 front pages in a row about did Keir Starmer break the rules by having a beer in Durham? Because what they want to do is to say to people, we're all as bad as each other. They're all terrible. So therefore, you might as well stick with the devil you know, because they're all as bad as each other. Now, that is a press bias that I called out all the time.
So is he... how it feels like in a couple of ways, it's more... Keir Starmer is coming in a more difficult... sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. If he comes in next year as the Prime Minister, not only will there be no money, he's also got a much more difficult press to turn around, has he? Because of the Corbyn, he's fighting off this Corbyn legacy as well as the Tories.
But there's never been a political leader who hasn't had all sorts of challenges to deal with all the time. The reason why strategy is so important is that can knock all that stuff aside as long as you have that clear strategy. Now, my hope for Keir is that he actually will be more suited to being a Prime Minister than I sometimes feel he is to being the leader of the opposition. Yeah. He's not a natural campaigner. He's not, when you see him speak, you don't sort of think, oh, there's a new Barack Obama in the making. No. But the real strength he's got, I think, and so is Rachel Reeves, and so is Wes Streeting, and I think they've got a good team developing, is that he's serious. He's a serious person. And, when people say, the thing you hear about Keir the whole time, I don't think he's boring, but you keep hearing this thing, oh, he's got no charisma. Well, let's just have a little reflection about where we've got to because of charisma, right? Johnson apparently had charisma. Liz Truss clearly has something, otherwise how did she become Prime Minister?
It's not charisma, surely. What?
No, I'll tell you what it is. It's a product of a politics that is just not serious.
Yeah.
It's not serious. For either of those two to have been Prime Minister of the United Kingdom is utterly ridiculous. And it just shows you and the reason why I'm pleased that, the podcast has done so well and why, the book has done well and people are really engaging in politics at the moment, I hope what it reflects is that people realise we have done ourselves enormous damage by not being serious.
And so taking Keir, who is who he is, and I personally think he's done a pretty extraordinary job from where, they were when he came in turning around the reputation of the Labour Party and making it electable. But what should he do now in the lead up to the election? And if he's successful, what would you like to see him do in the first 100 days? You talk quite a lot about the Blair first 100 days. What would you...
Well, the first. I'm not hung up on 100 days, but the first flush of government is an incredibly important moment because that is when you can set the tone for everything that follows, and it has to flow from the campaign. So, and when I think, if you remember, I can't remember when the Hartlepool by-election was, but if you remember, people remember the Hartlepool by-election, which is when the Tories won unexpectedly. And it was a real bad moment for Labour. And that was when there was a lot of rumbling. Does this guy really know what he's doing? He's not a politician, he's a lawyer. That was the kind of thing. And he's our MP, and, we know him well, and he came round for a cup of tea. And I was in that sort of tearing my hair out with him a bit. And I, as you know, I'm quite good at tearing my hair out. I'm not good at hiding what I think about things. Anyway, he said something then, which I've reflected on a lot since because I've watched him do it. He said, look, you guys, us, New Labour, you had to go from Michael Foot, and you went through Neil Kinnock, John Smith, and then Tony Blair, and, you took several parliaments, right? I'm trying to do it in one term, and I'm trying to be all of them. And I came from this terrible position in 2019. And I see myself as doing three stages. Stage one, decontaminate the brand, particularly to deal with anti-Semitism. Secondly, show the Tories are absolutely useless and unfit to run the country, which is, I think, clear to pretty much everybody by now.
That was his easiest one, I think.
I think he had so much friendly fire from within the Conservatives on each other that, yeah. And then the third bit is to show where Labour's going to be different. In, as you say, quite difficult, challenging economic circumstances. Now, when you say what would I like him to do, it's that bit with real clarity and real energy and a campaigning zeal that actually, I think, I honestly do think that it's really weird. I'm normally very, very good at predicting election results. I've got most of our elections not far off in the last kind of few decades. And with this one, I find it really hard to predict what's going to happen. But I can see a landslide, and I can also see a hung parliament. I think it's very hard to see the Tories winning again. I will ask for an audience view on this. Right, here's my favourite participation question. Well, my favourite participation question is this. Hands up who thinks Brexit's going well.
God, that's
got one guy up there. He's wearing a mask.
I approve of
doesn't
that.
want to know who he is. Right, but my other question is, so Brexit's a disaster, we agreed on that, yeah? Yeah, absolutely ridiculous.
They're terrified of you, Alastair.
No, they're not. Now, my next question is, who's going to be Prime Minister in 2025? I'm going to give you three choices. A, Sunak. B, Starmer. C, somebody else we don't know.
You're really going to upset him now.
Don't. That's who you want. That's different. Right, who thinks that Rishi Sunak can be Prime Minister in 2025? Ooh. Who thinks Kier Starmer? Who thinks maybe somebody else? What do you think of that?
Interesting, yeah. It's
Isn't
interesting. There's a few people who... I mean, I tend to agree that if he got in, he'd be much better at running it than...
So what he has to do, and this is why these 5 missions thing, which aren't... Right, here's another one. Hands up who could tell me what all the 5 missions are.
Again, I've read them about 20 times.
Any Labour candidates in here? Now, but what I can tell you, right, but my point is, and the point is not that everybody should be knowing them, but by the election, everybody should have a sense of what they mean. And I think that's kind of where he is at the moment. So he's at that stage. And then what you've got to do in government, the reason why it's so important to get a good win if it's possible, and by the way, it's bloody hard to do. Mm-hmm. You know, the swing required, let's imagine Scotland stays the same, okay? Which, just imagine for a minute it does. For the swing that will be required for Labour to get a majority will require them to win Jacob Rees-Mogg's seat.
But that's
hard.
That's possible, though, isn't it? I mean, that's the kind of thing
Well,
that alone would be enough for me in some way.
Okay, yeah, but that means that it is landslide territory.
Yeah.
Right? But if on the other hand, in Scotland, Labour gets, say, 25 seats, it brings the swing required down here to about 5%. So that's why Keir Starmer spends a lot of time in Scotland. So, but once you get in, if Labour get in, it's got to flow from what you've promised. So you really do have to go for growth. Yeah. Brackets, that means why you will have to start to talk about Brexit a little bit more than you're doing now.
Do you think before the election he will have to?
Well, I wish he would, because I actually don't buy this idea that, the Tories, every time, they run this line the whole time. I mean, don't vote Labour because he's going to try and take you back inside the European Union. I think there are some people, okay. Yeah. Have a bit of that. I think what people are terrified of is revisiting the division and the debate of it all. But look, the very minimum that has to be in the manifesto, as far as I'm concerned, is it's got to say Brexit has failed, it's been a terrible disaster, it's been delivered by the same people that have given us all these other scandals that we've seen. However, the country is not up for revisiting that basic question, but we do have to fix the relationship with the European Union. And once you've done that, and once you're in power, once you've got power, you can do stuff. And hopefully by then, if they really do win big, I think what would happen to the Tory party becomes a very interesting question. And I think, I'm telling you, if there was a leadership election, just remember, these people chose Johnson, then Truss. Yeah. Next up is Braverman.
Well, I was going to come to that in a bit, but while we're on the
Home run.
While we're on the Tories and what they've done, obviously the COVID inquiry has been has been on a lot in the press, and you know, someone who worked in ITU in London through it. It's pretty tough listening. I just wanted to.
Should have held the book up. Just yeah.
Sorry.
No, your book.
Oh right, yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh, such an amateur.
He's
so
rubbish
sorry.
at plugging his own book. Yeah.
But there is another one about the COVID pandemic that is also available somewhere. What was your reaction to what you've heard this week? Especially as we've heard a lot from people in Number 10, not politicians. There's two things. First of all, what do you think it says about the state of Number 10 compared with what you knew? But also, have we learnt any sort of concrete damage they've done? Or is this sort of just distasteful fluff that
Well, I thought Helen McNamara, the civil servant who was up there, she's the karaoke party lady. But actually, I think it's quite deep down a serious person. And she was asked what she thought of what Cummings and these other people have been saying. And she said she found it both shocking and not shocking. It was shocking because do we really, at our expense, don't forget, you know, we're paying their wages, we're paying them to do the jobs they're meant to be doing, who clearly behave in such a kind of awful way as human beings, but also not shocking because that is exactly what we imagined was going on. And this is why I still feel so strongly, well, there's lots of reasons I still feel strongly about Brexit, but one of them is that there has literally been no accountability for the lies that were told, for the crimes that were committed, for the fact that Boris Johnson became prime. So let's just think of this. Just think this through. Cameron has the referendum. Big mistake, right? But okay, we all make mistakes. That was just a very big one. Has the referendum. Johnson, he thinks Johnson and Gove are going to go with him. They don't. Johnson, I hate to say this because I don't want to give the guy any place in history whatsoever, but Johnson shifted the dial on that referendum. Yeah. No doubt about it. Johnson and Gove shifted the dial. They win the referendum, and Theresa May becomes Prime Minister. Theresa May, who, you know, if anybody listened to her on the podcast recently, comes across as much more decent and much more honest than most of them. But she, knowing Boris Johnson to be the liar and the charlatan that he is, she made him Foreign Secretary, which was the platform which then allowed him to use that position to undermine her from within, get rid of her, and take over. And then be what everybody who'd ever known him for more than a minute knew he would be, utterly unfit and incapable of doing the job. So nothing in this inquiry surprised me. When COVID was going on, probably because we were kind of locked down and I couldn't live my normal life, Fiona will tell you, I was getting up at 4 o'clock every morning, going down to the sofa, and I was ranting. I was thinking in ink and I was ranting. There was one day I had 21 different articles published in 21 different countries about how utterly useless this government was. However, I honestly, what I'm seeing now is way worse than even I thought. And what it says, I'm sorry, it goes to the top. I say in the book, this is before seeing what's happened recently, not for sort of vanity reasons, but I really resent, as sometimes happened, that they say, well, you know, I was the kind of Dominic Cummings of my era, right? I'll tell you several reasons I resent it. One, even though we got called liars the whole time, we are not and we were not. Secondly, we actually ran a really competent professional ship. But the big one is, I never ever, to this day, disrespected the guy that I worked for. Whereas you saw in the stuff last week, Cummings has utter contempt for Boris Johnson. Utter contempt.
I think that's the thing, one of the things that really struck me is it seems the closer you are to Johnson, the more you hate him.
He's gone through quite a few wives, isn't it?
Yeah. And the other thing that struck me was that, you know, overall in COVID, it seems we came out somewhere in the middle of the pack, but in the first wave, we as a country did pretty badly. And, you know, it's very easy with retrospect, but that sense of not taking it seriously.
Well, the thing is, you're talking about a kind of, it's this point about being serious. So you can look at New Zealand, right? Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand, got amazing credit around the world for the way she dealt with it. And actually, she and her party have paid a massive political price because in New Zealand, they felt, I'm not sure you handled it that well at all. Merkel handled it very differently. Macron, you know, so government by government, you can say, but the one thing you have to say about Trump with his nonsense about drinking bleach, Johnson, we now hear, thought, you know, maybe a hairdryer up the nose would have done it, is that at least these other governments, whatever decisions they were taking, at least they were serious.
Yeah.
He is not, I mean, honestly, I cannot emphasize enough, if we as a country do not learn the proper lessons out of this, that if we the people elect, well, I'll wind it back a bit. If we as a political system, this is what the book is trying to get to, is actually we need to change how we do politics. If we end up with a choice to the British people of your Prime Minister can either be Boris Johnson or Jeremy Corbyn, we are not a serious country. And if we have people like Johnson and Truss as Prime Ministers, and to be absolutely honest, I'm not convinced Sunak's that much better. He's not as big a liar as Johnson, and he's not quite as totally useless as Truss, right? It's such a low bar as to be ridiculous. So if we keep putting in totally unsuitable people to be Prime Minister, why should we be surprised when the country goes into decline?
Yeah, well, it's all going to be different in a year. I wanted to go back to the book.
Thank about bloody time.
Sorry, yeah.
I mean, it's a literary festival. We've got to flog books, haven't we?
Sorry,
Tanya?
yes.
I mean, Tanya spent years trying to get me to come in and flog my book.
So one of the things that you that stood out for me was your OST thing that you've written all over North London, and so objective, strategy, tactic, and this very very precise thing of making sure you don't muddle up which is which really struck me, made me realise quite a few mistakes I'd made. So I want to ask you a specific question about today, which a friend of mine asked me to ask you. Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil. What do you think of their OST?
Well, their objective is to, I guess their overall objective is to end the use of fossil fuels. Their strategy is one of protest, and their tactics are, you know, blocking roads and disrupting sporting events. And so I'd say from their perspective, they've got it very clear.
And effective?
Well,
do you think they've moved the dial? Do you think they're moving the dial?
I think they have. I think it's very hard to put it this way. The dial is moving on the debate.
Right.
And they are part of that. So it's impossible to judge, you know, what exactly does move the debate. But, you know, I think I write a book in the book about Greta Thunberg, and she's definitely moved the dial. I think business has moved the dial. It was very interesting, the Sunak speech recently. I think he's trying to move the dial backwards, okay? But I think I think the dial's just moving. I could be completely wrong about this, but I think he's actually made a terrible political mistake. I don't believe he's going to get the political mileage out of this sort of, you know, reversal that he thinks he is. I could be wrong, but I actually think he's made a mistake.
Well, a friend of mine who's in fact advising Ed Miliband's team now said actually even Trump can't turn the dial back because companies are moving it. You know, it's business moving it.
Yeah.
So we're going to come to questions from the audience, but I wanted to do a very quick fire, if that's all right.
Yeah.
I'm getting well into this interviewing
He
thing.
loves it, doesn't he? He doesn't want to be a doctor anymore.
So,
that's his body, he's boring.
So you're very, you describe yourself as very tribal, which is somewhere we differ a bit, and your two big loves are, as far as I can see, are Burnley and Scotland. So Burnley to win the league or Scotland to win the World Cup? I know that's not going to happen in either, but it's nice for him to have dreams.
Yeah. Well, Scotland to win the World Cup.
Okay.
And then Burnley to win the league the next year.
So Starmer's in with a good majority, let's say a medium-sized majority.
200.
200, that'll do. Who would you like for, globally, not on an emotional level, but globally, would you like to see sitting opposite him in the dispatch box? And your options are Farage, Braverman, or Stewart.
Oh, okay, that's a very good question. That's a very good. Rory Stewart. Yeah.
Even though that might bring
because
the Tory party back.
I actually do think that our system, I think our politics has been best when you've had two good ones in the job.
Who was the best one you faced with Blair? Was it Haig?
The only time we got a little... Well, Cameron... By the time Cameron came along and Tony was kind of, getting towards the end, I can remember saying to Tony, I'm not sure if this Cameron has got much. I think it might be good enough. I remember saying that. William Hague was the one who caused us the most sleepless nights.
Because he was funny?
Partly because he was funny, but I remember, one of the few things I remember from my university days was somebody telling me T.S. Eliot's definition of wit. The alliance of levity and seriousness by which the seriousness is intensified.
Oh, wow. And
Hague was good at that.
Yeah.
Hague was good at that. He was good at landing really serious points, but making them funny. If anybody ever says to me, what is spin? And I say, well, one of my favourite examples of spin is when we were worrying about William Hague, because he was so funny and so sharp. So we developed a line to run against Hague, which was, he's all jokes, no judgment. And we used it all the time. So Tony would come back, look, he's very good with the jokes, however, he's joking everywhere, he's joking. And as a result of which, Seb Coe, who was Hague's chief of staff, told me afterwards that as a result of this, Hague said, we've got to cut down on the
Oh, wow. Yeah. So he lost his
nerve.
Power.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're not going to like this. Johnson or Truss to come back as PM?
Oh, it's...
Not having that, okay.
Well, it's not going to happen.
PR or first past the post?
I blow hot and cold.
Okay. Germany or France?
Ooh. As a favourite country?
Yeah.
France.
Swim or...
Because of the language.
Swim or cycle?
Cycle.
Blair, Wilson or Attlee?
Ooh.
We are recording this.
Well, it's got to be Blair then.
I think we know what you meant there. So you've got a magic wand. Yeah. You can choose between Trump and Biden fighting it out, or a guaranteed the worst other Republican candidate, and you have to pick now.
Sorry.
To
win.
So you either have a Trump-Biden fight,
yeah,
or you have, say, Ramaswamy, or the worst, your least other, who's guaranteed to win. So would you take the worst other Republican, or would you let those two old guys fight it out?
Oh well, I thought you were going to ask me if I would replace both of them. Who it would be? I'm glad you didn't ask me that one. I just want Biden to win.
Okay.
Yeah.
And
the Republic, you see, in the end, I mean, Trump is such an exceptional figure in terms of, we've never ever had a politician like Trump. But what he's done, a bit like Johnson did to the Conservative Party, and Sunak is not repairing it, is they've hollowed out the ethos of the party. The Republican Party is no longer a Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is no longer a Conservative Party. They're radical, right-wing, disruptive forces that are... I mean, it's absolutely hilarious today. Well, hilarious is the wrong word, but the Observer front page has a story that Braverman, fresh from saying that she's going to stop charity, she's going to fine charities for giving tents to homeless people, which alone...
Lifestyle choice.
A lifestyle choice, I mean, please. And now they're going to bring in legislation to widen the scope of what we define as extremism for anyone who undermines parliamentary democracy or British values and institutions. In which case, the entire cabinet should go to jail, because they've done all of those. They're the ones who are undermining British values and institutions. So, I can't remember what the question was now.
Don't worry.
We're just ranting again.
You know, it's... Has Dominic Cummings become the new Malcolm Tucker? Is your...
Yeah, he swears more than I do, I'd say.
Excellent.
Yeah. I never swore at an inquiry.
Ooh, sorry, that's to say we should go to the
That's
floor.
so weird, you know, because that's normally I wake up when I hear that.
Oh, time to wake up.
The swearing is... no, I think I do swear a lot. I'll tell you, I was very, very pleased yesterday. Somebody tweeted. Somebody had written a piece, back to the point about saying that I was like Cummings, sweary and macho and all that nonsense. And somebody did a thing on Twitter that said, comparing me to Cummings is like comparing Elvis to a shaking Stevens tribute act.
Which one were you?
I love that. and also said, and it was a civil servant who did it, who's now left the civil service, said that every civil servant who ever worked for me would say that they enjoyed it. And I've never had any criticism from the civil service.
So final 2 questions, and then we'll go to the audience. Who's more competitive, Alastair Campbell or Rory Stewart?
I think I am.
Really?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, that's very interesting.
I think so. I think so.
I've been asked again...
Put it this way. When we get knocked off number 1 in the podcast charts, he doesn't do quite as much as I do to get it back up.
You take it's the big things. And this has been asked, when are the Alastair Campbell new hot showers going to be installed at the Lido?
I know, it's a nightmare. The suffering we have to go through every morning with cold showers.
So, shall we put the lights up? And are there some questions from the floor? So there's one lady with a red hairband on the...
Yeah, but hold on a minute. The 2 microphones are both over here, so you say go over there. I mean,
it's my first
time. Oh, sorry, it's your first time,
yeah. We've got through it. No one's...
You've done well. He's done well, hasn't he? Yeah, he's done well. Yeah, he's good.
Good news for you that the waves tomorrow morning are going to only be just under a metre at the West Bay, so that we can hope to see you down there.
Okay, what time do you go?
Well, I usually go at 9, so
right.
I'm not the sort of early bird.
Well, just to tell you, at 10 tomorrow, Jim is doing a thing about his book. So if you haven't got tickets for that yet, you should, okay? So do your swim and then get to see Jim. The other thing I've got to say, where am I staying again?
What?
Where am I staying?
You're staying at the Seaside Boarding House.
Seaside Boarding House, right. They did say on the way out, saying, can you tell the audience they've got a few seats for dinner tonight if anybody wants to? Done my bit.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Very reasonable.
Sorry, what's your question?
Right next to the Burton Bradstock Beach, and I would say if you're going to swim there, just make sure you've got someone watching you.
No, they've told me not to swim there tomorrow.
Well, they might say that, but
He
us
nearly
swimmers
drowned
would
off
say...
We swam in Preston this afternoon.
And I have got a question.
Yeah.
In our constituency, we have had 20 years of the Lib Dems standing against first Oliver Letwin and now Chris Loder. Mm. And it has been close. But we do have an issue, which is that the Labour voters will remind us of the coalition years and say they aren't prepared to vote. So what would you suggest we can do, those of us who would like to change the colour of our MP?
Well, one of the benefits, as Jim said, I'm very tribal, but I was kicked out of the Labour Party by Uncle Jeremy over Brexit. And one of the reasons I've not rejoined is because I want to go out and say that I profoundly support tactical voting. And I would urge anybody, that by-election up in Nadine Dorries' seat the other day, I mean, Labour won it, but the Lib Dems still spent the whole campaign telling people that they could win it, when deep down I don't think they ever thought they could. And I just think we've got to be grown up, because the fact is that the electoral system is kind of, the reason I didn't fight very hard to get it changed when we were in power is because actually the electoral system suited us at that time. Because of the balance of where the voters swung since then, it suited the Tories. And I think eventually, you asked about PR, I think eventually we will have to change the electoral system because so many people now just see it as utterly unfit for purpose. But you can only change it if you get a government elected that is committed to changing it and then has a referendum, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I think that if I were a Lib Dem or a Green in a seat where it's an obvious two-way marginal between the Tories and Labour, I'd be going to the Labour candidate and saying, right, I'm going to vote for you, but I'm going to ask you something in return. And the parties should put pressure on each other. But I think at the next election, I would have no hesitation in voting Lib Dem in a seat where the Labour were a distant third. And if I were a Lib Dem in a seat where Labour are a strong second, I think that they should vote to get rid of the Tory.
Can I just ask you a supplementary on the PR? Do you think PR reduces the chance of extreme governments or doesn't affect them?
Well, it's a very interesting question, that. So one of the reasons I've got less enthusiastic in recent months is because you had a situation in the Netherlands where they can barely put together a government because the smaller parties have grown and grown and grown. And, you know, at a time when the Netherlands was the old Netherlands, as it were, before extremism and populism came in, because all European countries are dealing with this, we thought, well, that's great. They're getting all these sensible parties and they're making a difference. And then the other thing that worries me is the fact that in Germany, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is, a really, really, really nasty right-wing party. I saw their leader recently was saying that the latest thing is the idea that, disabled children shouldn't be in normal schools. Well, I can remember the last German leader who had a big one on that. But they're now well over 20% in the polls. In some parts of the East, they're well over 30% in the polls. So if you have a proportional their system of government, very hard for Angela Merkel held the line. We will never have the deals with the AfD. Very hard when you get up to the 30%.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
One of the things that stops people becoming involved in public life in doing the kind of things you're advocating for in your book, I think, is the level of abuse and toxicity in public life nowadays. Now, you don't come across as someone with a problem of confidence, but there was a time when you were a hate figure, and to a certain extent still are to some people. And I was curious if that...
I never said that.
But it's worth acknowledging because it has a big impact on people that look at the prospect of doing these things.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if it did affect you, or, for instance, whether there are people who are immune to these things. And if it did affect you, did you have a strategy, an objective and a tactic for moving through to a different way of being?
What, to the national treasure status that I know? That is a very, 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 very good question. And I could sit here all night and answer it because it's complicated. But to make it the simple message I try to give people, and particularly young people, who the book is partly about trying to get young people to take a greater interest and at least think that they might try politics at some point, whether as a politician or not, but, get engaged and get interested, is that whenever they say, yeah, but what about the abuse? I actually say, well, I've had more abuse than most politicians have ever had, and I'm fine with it. I'm fine with it. It doesn't mean that it's nice. It doesn't mean that there haven't been moments when you think, is this really worth it? There are definitely moments. I remember, my mother's dead now, but, when my mother was alive, she felt it way worse than I did when I was, as you say, a bit of a hate figure. And that does get to you. But I think you've got to, I quote in the book, Julia Gillard, the former Australian Prime Minister. And I said to her, because let me tell you this, however bad I've had it, it's worse for women and it's worse for women of colour. And Julia Gillard had a lot, because, Australia's got a bit of a reputation for misogyny, all that stuff. And anybody who hasn't ever seen her speech on misogyny in the Australian Parliament, it's just an amazing moment. And I said, so what do you say to an 18-year-old girl who comes along and says, I'm thinking of going to politics? She says, go for it. And then what do you say to her worrying about all the abuse? She said, what I say is, I look back at my career and I don't even think about the abuse. I look at the things that I was able to do because I made it. And I know that's a very hard thing to sort of go for. But I'll tell you the thing, my daughter's a comedian, and she gets quite a lot of abuse because women do, and women comedians do. You know, they're not meant to be funny and all that stuff. And, you know, most of it on social media and occasionally face to face. And a lot of it about me. And, you know, I always say to her, one, you know, they're noticing you, which is part of what you want, which is why you want to be out there telling stories. But secondly, don't let somebody who you're probably never going to see again, whose opinions you're never likely to respect, because that's the sort of person they are. You're not going to respect that sort of person who's going to sit there abusing you on social media. Just don't let their opinions matter. Worry about the opinion of people who matter to you. And I know that can sound quite a tough message, but I guess it's not just saying kind of, you know, toughen up and develop a thick skin. You can still be sensitive. You can still be sensitive. You have to be sensitive in politics to what people are thinking about you. But if we all let it get to us, nobody's going to do it. And the other thing I'd say about social media and artificial intelligence and all this stuff, it's not going to get better. It's not going to get better. And I say in the book, I just try to be honest with people about that. But then the other thing I say, when you said, did I have an objective strategy tactics? I did. And the strategy, I've invented the word in the book, perseverance. Just keep...
I don't think Shakespeare's worrying to me.
Well, he's dead. He's dead. I think Shakespeare would have invented that word.
He would have.
Yeah, if he'd have been around another month, I think he would have. No, but in the end, you've got to keep going. And look at the people who've done it. Has anybody seen the Beckham documentary series on Netflix? Right. Fantastic example. Beckham is now in such a place that even I follow football very, very closely, I'd completely forgotten just what a hate figure he was for a time. Keep going. Do what you believe in. It's the only way to do it.
There's what...
Sorry, I just want to ask, how would you target 16-year-olds?
How would I target 16-year-olds?
Yes, but just maybe serious folks.
Oh, yeah. Well, interestingly, if you listen to the podcast this week, we're going to talk about the elections in Argentina. And there they have compulsory voting from 18 to 70. And then they have voluntary compulsory voting. In other words, everybody gets the vote from 16 to 18 and people over 70. God, I wish we'd have that in Brexit. You know, maybe if everybody vote. Anyway, I mustn't insult old people, because no. So, no, the point I was going to make is that to get... When my daughter was about 13, 14, and I was saying to her and her friends, I really think we should lower the voting age. And she was saying, Dad, you know loads of my friends, they don't know much about politics. But I know 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds who don't know much about politics. What I go to lots of schools, and I've gone to lots since this book came out, and I'm now writing a book for politics for primary schools. And what I get in every school I go into is a greater level of engagement, understanding and interest than you get with most adult audiences. I really believe that. And I think we should lean into that rather than sort of push them away. And the other thing we need to do is to get proper political education on the curriculum, because we don't have it. I read a horrific thing today. 2% of schools in this country learn about the Middle East peace process.
There's one up the top, I think. Is that the one you... Yeah.
Alastair, I think that you might agree that today in politics, it really has to change for the better. On the basis that in the House of Commons chamber, it's set up in such a way that it becomes, or is, very adversarial. And for those of us that sometimes watch Parliament Today and other such programs, it actually verges on insanity. Some of the things that are said to each other, the noise, and so on. I wonder what your view might be, that given that at the moment billions of pounds is being spent in preserving, an artifact, but nobody, as far as I know, has ever said, look, let's change this chamber so that it's not people facing each other shouting at each other, abusing each other. Let's make it round, for example, so that it becomes a chamber for discussion rather than opinions being voiced in such a way that it becomes really unreal.
Well, look, there's no doubt, there was a time when the chamber, particularly when the early days of radio and then the first televising, people were kind of slightly mesmerised by it, and mesmerised by it on a global basis. You know, I remember when Tony first became leader of the Labour Party, and we were out in Washington this guy, hey, it's the C-SPAN guy. You know, because C-SPAN was this American TV station that showed our parliament. And so they said, hey, the C-SPAN guy. So, you know, and by the way, you're wrong to say that nobody's ever suggested this, because there was an MP, Labour MP called Graham Allen. He was obsessed with this. And I'm beginning to think maybe he was just a little bit ahead of his time. Because I think it has to change. It has to change. What I say in the book, and what I say to my friends in the Labour Party, we're going to need more than a change of government to get politics back on the road in this country. We're going to need a change in the way that we do politics. And I actually would really like Kier to commit to a kind of fundamental review of voting systems, of devolution, of whether we broaden and deepen the role of elected mayors, of the relationship between the four parts of the United Kingdom, political education, as I said, compulsory voting, as I said, lowering the voting age. I think there's so much that we could do, but you can only do it if you admit that the state of our politics is pretty rotten. And yes, the current government has made it more rotten through the corruption in COVID and through Johnson's lies and all the rest of it. But let's not kid ourselves that just a change of government is going to kind of, wipe the slate clean. It's not. I mean, that being said, if you look at the Scottish Parliament, where the design is very much, the architecture, that they were briefed to fit a different new system. But I think if you talk to most Scottish politicians, they will say that they're hitting each other just as hard. But I think that I completely agree with the point, the central point.
We've got one there and then one here. We'll hopefully squeeze these last.
I was going to make a similar point, really. One of the joyous things about the podcast is you get intelligent conversation and a recognition that there are complex issues to discuss, and there's positives and negatives on both sides, and you just do not see that from politicians in Parliament or outside Parliament. And I guess the question is, do you think that the Boris Johnson approach, if we can call it that, has irreparably damaged politics? Can politics recover from that?
Well, I say in the book that the reason to take hope from the speed at which things have declined so much through just a couple of really, really bad actors is that improvement can go at the same pace. So yes, I think it is recoverable. I do think a change of government will be a massive thing. I do think the fact that we have a serious Prime Minister again, that'll be a good thing. But I think we, the public, have also got to face up to our own responsibilities in this as well. I still get alarmed at the extent to which, you'll hear people, if you talk about Trump and Johnson, it's sort of people just laugh and think, oh, well, at least he's funny, And I just think it's not funny anymore because they've done so much damage. The fact that Liz Truss, who a year ago, whacked through her own sort of uselessness and ego and vanity and all that stuff, basically made, house buying virtually impossible for most of our kids and whacked a massive great chunk on your mortgage as well, is now writing a book called 10 Years to Save the West. And when it comes out, we'll have large sections of the media giving her absolute free platform because she's one of the sexy figures on the right.
She's not coming here.
She's not coming here. That will kill her. No, but the point, and by the way, just to sort of defend Parliament a bit, part of the problem is the extent to which media coverage of Parliament has just become the trivia. and the personality stuff. You know, that's why I think we were at an event last night, and the guy, Beric Fellner from Working Title, was there, and he was saying, really enjoyed the podcast, and he said the reason he enjoys it is because we're having discussions that you don't see elsewhere in the media. Well, why aren't they having those discussions elsewhere in the media? They see them a bit, but, you know, we've now got a pretty dumbed-down press. We've got a broadcast media that is now getting ever more politicized. There's GB News and all this stuff. And so we, the public, have got to, you know, every time, you know, I won't reveal my obsession with the Daily Mail too much, but every time you buy that paper, that's a political choice. Every time we buy a newspaper, it's not just a consumer choice, it's a political choice.
You see on the GB News yesterday, someone got thrown off
Michael Crick.
during a speech about free speech.
Michael Crick.
Being too anti-GB.
Yeah. So, you know, I guess the top line is never buy the Daily Mail again.
Have we got time for one more?
Of course we have.
Go on a bit.
There's a question here.
Can I ask you, as Alastair Campbell, Director of Communications at Number 10, what's your legacy?
I don't have one. Well, I don't think I have one. I think that, look, I definitely modernise communications. I would like, I've done, of all the podcasts that I've done recently to promote my book, my favourite, yet to be broadcast, was with Kathy Burke, the comedian, and it's called Where There's a Will, There's a Wake. And it's basically where you're asked to imagine your own death, your own funeral, your own will, and there is all this question about legacy. And so I said to her, look, I know that when I die, the words Tony and Blair will be in the first paragraph of my obituary. Right? I know that. It doesn't matter what I do. I mean, okay, if I become the first person to land on Mars, maybe, but it's got to be that sort of level to sort of move it on from that. And I'm fine with that. You know, I was part of the whole creation of and implementation of the New Labour thing, and I think we were a good government that did lots of good for the country, but Tony Blair's is his legacy, as it were. And then I think where I hopefully have a different sort of stuff that I've done, I actually think the stuff I've done in mental health in the last decade or so is, I feel for me is, but I'd love part of the legacy when I pop my clogs to be, he was one of the few people who never gave up banging on about how awful Brexit was for the country. And that is why, you know, we're back in.
I was sure you were going to say played with Pele and Maradona.
And play with Pele and Maradona, yeah. That is a big part of it, yeah.
We've got
Question.
last one.
Tanya says it's the last one.
Well, it doesn't have to be, but you've got a lot of books to sign.
Oh, good. Signed book is a soul book.
Yeah. Mine's a fairly quick question. How long are the Conservatives going to hold on? And when they lose the next election, will there be a splinter party similar to the SDP?
I mean, look, let me tell you, are you a Labour supporter? Or a Lib Dem or a... You're a Lib Dem, okay. Well, when I was 1997, a week before the election, in a hotel in Luton, that is how dedicated we were. We stayed in hotels in Luton.
Are they above Burnley or below at the moment?
Oh. Well, if they beat Liverpool tonight, they go above us. No, they are above us. Yeah. No, and I got a phone call from the Daily Telegraph, and they said, we've got an opinion poll today, you're 30 points ahead. And I said, I don't believe it, it's a rogue poll, if I were you, I wouldn't even run it. I never, ever, ever, and I say this to Kier Smith all the time, I never, ever, ever, ever say it's in the bag. Your question slightly frightens me. The way to win a landslide is to fight it every day like you think you're going to lose. Now, if Labour win, and win well, I do honestly think that Braverman will be the next leader. And I'm glad that's the reaction. But they'll very quickly discover that it's a disaster for them. But you've got to remember who's going to vote for it. It's these members who voted for Johnson and Truss. And bear in mind, loads of the reasonable ones have left. You know, lots of people have left the Tory party in disgust recently. I mean, there is actually a case for us all joining the Tory party. Yeah, I know, it's tough, isn't it? No, yeah, we couldn't do that. Yeah, we couldn't do that. But, so, will there be a splinter party? I mean, you have to say that, in a way, the various manifestations of the Reform Party, the Brexit Party and that lot, they've been the splinter party. And the Tories will be worried about them. Farage, whether we like it or not, is, yes, he's one of the Brexit chief liars and he's all those things and he's a total charlatan, but he's an incredibly effective campaigner. They'll be worried about him. They'll be worried about him. I actually think there's a very good chance he will be the Tory leader after Braverman.
Farage?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
God.
They're going to go right. They're going to do
going so well.
They're going to do what we've done when we've lost in the past. You know, the Labour Party's gone left, and then eventually come back to a more sort of sensible mainstream position. I think the Tory party will go right. Now, the question might be: would a kind of Ken Clarke-ish, Rory Stewart, Anna Soubry, Dominic Grieve, that wing of the Tory party, would they do something new and different? I don't know. But I think it's very hard to see the Tory party going anywhere other than rightwards. And there's a reason why Sunak's doing this nonsense about, 7 bins and tax on meat, and why Braverman's doing this horrible, evil stuff about tents and, I mean, it's just, there's a reason why they're doing it. They're appealing to the operative word, base. That's what they're doing. Can't we end on a happier note?
Yeah.
One more question for the
Right,
gentleman.
happy, has to be happy. Has to allow me to say something uplifting.
We all have regrets.
Oh, no, not really. Oh, no!
My biggest regret is I never learnt to play a musical instrument. What's your biggest regret? And it can be political or just personal.
That he learned to play the bagpipes.
That is not my
That's my biggest...
No, my biggest regret tonight is I didn't bring my bagpipes with me, because that would have been a perfect setup. I'm sorry I didn't. Right, we're going to end on an uplifting note. Fiona, are you there?
Yes.
My biggest regret is that I didn't get a dog. Until I was quite old, and I wish I'd had a dog all my life. Do you want to meet my dog?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah. Fiona, bring her on. Bring her on. And I'm going to show you my socks. How many of you got your dog on your socks? Hey? Oh, Fiona's going to be cross with me now, isn't she?
This guy's coming.
She's going to come. Hey! Hello, darling. Look at that. Here she is. Guy. She loves an audience, doesn't she? You can tell. Yeah. Oh, yes. So there we are. Right, are we done?
Yes, thank you. Thanks so much, Alastair.
Thank you.
If Rory does get back into the Tory party, I'm available
for the
podcast. Shinky's quaking in his boots.
And don't forget,
yes,
life in the balance. Now listen, you're not allowed to move now, okay? Yeah. Don't move.
Because Alastair has got to get to the back of the theatre to sign books. There are lots of books to sign. Christmas is coming. Listen to the podcast.
Yeah, Christmas is coming. Birthdays. Anniversaries.
Bar
mitzvahs.
Meet Sky personally.
Hey, come on. See you later.